Welcome back to the School Leadership Show for Mini-sode or mini episode 2. Jen David Lang's back with me. Hi, Jen.
Hey, Mike.
So in this one, the first one we talked about leadership resilience. So kind of working on yourself as the leader and supporting others. But this one, our theme is interpersonal skills for school leaders. We're going to talk about 4 different books. And again, the format of the mini-sode here is to, around a theme, give you some quick summaries, quick teasers about several different books that if this was a topic you wanted to dig more deeply into, these, in this case, 4 books would be the place to start. So the first one is The Listening Leader, Creating the Conditions for Equitable School Transformation by Shane Saphir. And they're all 4 of these. Well, actually, these first 2 we have a podcast on. The second 2 we don't. The second one is Thanks for the Feedback, The Science and Art of Receiving Feedback Well by Douglas Stone and Sheila Heen. We have a podcast episode about that one. And then the third one, Working with Difficult and Resistant Staff by John Eller and Sheila Eller. And the final one, Trust Matters, Leadership for Successful Schools by Megan Shannon Moran. So where do you want to start, Jen?
Let's start with Shane Saphir's The Listening Leader.
Okay.
These are 4 great books about developing interpersonal skills, if that's something you want to work on. And probably if you've been around during the pandemic the last 2 years, you realize how important those interpersonal skills can be. So part of why I love this book by Shane is that if I could grant leaders one superpower, if I could have granted leaders one superpower during the pandemic, I think it would be to be a good listener, because there's so much you can do by listening well, by having people feel heard. So a lot of us come to the role of school leader with a lot of skills, but often not with the skill of working with adults. And so Shane is really trying to help leaders develop the skill of listening in particular, and not just the skill, but also the mindset of why it is actually important to listen. She created a school a number of years ago, and before she created it, she and her team went into the community and they employed the 90-10 principle, which was they listened for 90% of the time and they only spoke for 10% of the time. Now, I don't know about you, Mike, but I aspire to that, but I can't say that any conversation I've ever had that I really listen for 90% of the time.
It's not easy. And you said it, right? That there's a lot you can do if you know how to listen well. And I would argue, I don't know, is it the converse or the inverse of that, which is there's not much you can do if you don't listen well.
That is a great segue, because this is not just a book about, sitting back and listening. It really is a book about change and getting things done, but doing so by slowing down, listening to all voices, those not necessarily traditionally heard, and really gathering that kind of data from listening as opposed to just trusting all of the big capital D data and making the change that you want. So she has a lot of great points in this book. I'll share a few. She talks about a 3-step process to prepare for listening. So imagine you have, an angry parent coming in, or you have to give feedback to a teacher whose class you observed and there were a lot of issues. So she suggests 3 steps. The first step is to look in the mirror, and that is look at yourself. Like, what are your own thoughts and feelings? Like, why are you reacting so strongly to this parent or to what you saw in the classroom? So look at yourself first, step 1. Step 2, after looking in the mirror, is to put yourself in the other person's shoes. You hear that a lot, and it's cliche, but it's so important. How might the other person be feeling? What if I were the teacher and the principal walked into my classroom while it was really loud? What if I'm the parent and my child were bullied? So really take a moment to put yourself in the other person's shoes. And then 3, step up to the balcony. And that means observe this conversation from as if you were a neutral observer. And how might that change in perspective help you as you prepare to go in and listen? So very simple sort of 3-step process to think about preparing to listen. She also talks about different kinds of listening, and I had never really thought about it this way. She talks about strategic listening. So it's when you listen to hope to change something. So as part of a coaching conversation or a debriefing conversation, the strategic listening is because you hope to change something. But there's a different kind of listening that we don't employ as much as school leaders, and that is deep listening, where you really have no agenda. You're just listening to support someone, right? So a teacher is just really upset about some initiative, or a student, had a fight and is just upset, or a parent, a bus stop was moved and now it's not safe and a parent is really upset. So even if you can't do anything, but just the power of just listening to help someone feel heard. So I like that strategic listening and deep listening. And she has chapters on listening to students, listening to parents, developing a listening culture. She really talks about infusing your whole school with listening. Imagine the power if you decided to make that a real goal for the next school year, is to infuse your whole school with listening. And again, the book is not just listening for the sake of listening. She has a chapter on the 6 steps to influence complex change, all rooted in listening. So I love the theme of this book.
And that was Shane Safira's book, The Listening Leader, Creating the Conditions for Equitable School Transformation. And then kind of we want to keep it in that same vein of listening and go to thanks for the feedback.
Yeah. And another book I love, Douglas Stone and Sheila Heen. So as school leaders, we focus a lot on giving feedback, right? Be sure to say something positive, focus on one thing at a time, make sure the feedback is timely. But even if you craft the perfect feedback, it's really up to the teacher or the leader who gets the feedback, whether they're going to do anything about it. You could have the perfect feedback and they, crumple it up in their mind and throw it out. So I really love that they focus on the feedback receiver. So, think about it. Think about when you get tough feedback, right? What happens? Your heart pounds, right? Your blood pressure rises, you get enraged, and then, you throw it aside, you ignore it, right? But the authors have a great quote. They say, trying to ignore a triggered reaction without first identifying its cause is like dealing with a fire by disconnecting the smoke alarm, right? So you're not really addressing what's at the root here. So they share 3 main obstacles we have to receiving feedback. The first type of obstacle are truth triggers. When there's something about the content of the feedback that we feel immediately is wrong or unfair, unhelpful. So let's take an example, right? A principal observes a teacher and says to the teacher that the students were out of control in the class. Now, if I'm the teacher, I think, what? I was doing a real hands-on activity. Everybody was supposed to be up and about. So I disagree with the content of the feedback. So that gets at a truth trigger. A second obstacle to receiving feedback well are relationship triggers, right? It's all about the relationship with the person. Maybe you understand that with your spouse or your parent. But now imagine I can't hear this feedback from you. So again, principal observes a teacher, says something about the classroom management being out of control. And I'm the teacher and I say, what does this principal know about classroom management? She's never even taught before and she's a principal, right? So that's about the relationship, right? I don't respect this principal. She doesn't have classroom experience. So you might have a truth trigger. You might have a relationship trigger, maybe your mother-in-law, people who you just can't receive feedback well. And then the third one, and this one I've definitely experienced in my life, are identity triggers. Feedback that threatens who I am or who I believe I am. So let's say I'm a teacher and I believe, all the new teachers come to observe my class when they want to see excellent classroom management, right? That's my reputation. I see myself as having perfect classroom management. And then the principal comes in, observes my class and gives me some feedback about the poor classroom management. What? I'm the queen of classroom management. So now it's about my identity. You're giving me feedback that goes against who I think I am. So I think it's very clever that Stone and Heen are giving advice for how people might receive feedback. And for each of these triggers, of course, they give lots of strategies for how you can overcome them. And, as a school leader, the first thing you can do is model receiving feedback well. When you yourself, whoever you're getting feedback from, whether it's, superintendent or, a student who walks into your office, stop and pause. And might you be having one of these 3 triggers? And how could you receive the feedback more gracefully and find what's right with the feedback and what you can listen to And you can certainly do a workshop with teachers about these 3 triggers as you're going into the season of giving teachers feedback to help them too with this awareness.
And speaking of people who need feedback, how about Working with Difficult and Resistant Staff by John and Sheila Eller?
Yes. So I don't think there's any school or district leader out there who hasn't dealt with difficult or resistant staff. And we tend to just clump them all together like, oh, I've got these difficult people. But in this book, they really talk about 8 different types of difficult people, and they give you specific strategies to deal with each one. And you know that you probably spend way too much time and energy dealing with those difficult and resistant staff. And so I like that the strategies, some of them are proactive, some of them are for in the moment. But I think it's something that we could all use help with. And I also appreciate the honesty of these authors. And they also say, hey, you as the leader, you might be doing some things to contribute to them being difficult. You got to look inside too, because maybe what you're doing is fanning the flames a little bit and making things worse. You might be contributing to the problem. So yes, there are some difficult people, but also you too might be adding to this.
So what are the 8 types?
So I guess I'll go there. It could take a while, but I'll just give you a broad overview. Yeah. There are the underminers, the contrarians, the recruiters, the challenged, the on-the-job retirees, the resident experts, the unelected representatives, the whiners and complainers. Yeah, that's all 8.
And that's spectacular. Yep. Yeah. I got as you went through that list, I had faces to go along with each one of those from when I was a principal.
Exactly. So, so like the underminers are those people who they don't complain when you're sharing a new initiative, but then they're the ones talking in the parking lot with other people about all the problems with the new initiative. And so, strategies are certainly to stand up for them, model appropriate behavior, be sure to develop trust ahead of time, right? Setting norms and ground rules. So that, they're giving all kinds of strategies to deal with the underminers. And then you might be contributing to the underminers by taking a more autocratic approach, right? Are you including people in your decision-making? Maybe you're making things worse. The on-the-job retirees, maybe certainly appeal to their pride, right? What do you want to leave? What's your legacy to the school? But we do tend to ignore some of our staff members in their last year. So maybe we're making the problem worse. But yeah, so that gives you an idea of some of these difficult staff members. And there are lots of strategies in this book to help you deal with them.
And I like that approach, that it isn't just about blaming the other people. There's some agency there and some efficacy that you as the leader have in terms of how your behavior, may be helping or hurting the situation. And then the last one, Trust Matters, Leadership for Successful Schools by Megan Shannon Moran. How did this one wind up rounding out the list?
It's hard to keep. I apologize for referring to the pandemic so much, but I think we all saw how important trust was, right? Schools that had trust, I think they weathered the storm a little bit better these last few years. There's been a ton of research that shows the importance of trust in schools. And this book goes over the theory about trust, but also, again, some very concrete strategies. But yeah, schools that have trust have students with higher performance, higher teacher retention rates, something we need with this great resignation, more parent involvement, and other key aspects of the school that are important for school success. And so, yeah, I think, trust, it's the glue that holds schools together, and the converse is true, right? The lack of that trust is what often leads to schools unraveling. As you know, trust isn't just a lever you turn on or a workshop you go to, but it takes time to build. So if trust is lacking or needs to be built up, now is a good time to start thinking about the new school year and how you might begin to prioritize it. Like the Chinese proverb, which says, when's the best time to plant a tree? 20 years ago. When is the second best time now? Same thing with trust. When should you have built trust? Yes, 20 years ago, but don't worry, you can start now. So the author uses this analogy that trust is like lubricant. It's like the oil that makes everything else run more smoothly. So if you say, oh, I don't have time for that, I've got this initiative, that's what's going to help the changes, the initiative, whatever you're trying to do, run more smoothly, right? I mean, imagine a car without the oil, like everything just kind of gets stuck. So that's the whole idea, obviously, behind trust. And schools with high level of trust have teachers who are more motivated and willing to try new strategies because they trust their leaders. You have students who are more motivated and connected to the school because they trust their teachers and their leaders. And families are more supportive because leaders have built trust. So, so where to start? First of all, trust is one of these like catch-all phrases. Like, what the heck does that mean? So I really appreciate that the author breaks it down into 5 components. And you can imagine building up each one in your leadership practice. The first one is benevolence, like being caring, showing goodwill toward others, appreciating staff, right? Of course, having appreciations during staff meetings, making fair decisions. So that's the first one, is benevolence. The second one is openness, right? Do you ask for feedback? Going back to thanks for the feedback. Do you involve others in decision making? Have you been willing to listen to the opinions of others? So benevolence, openness, and then honesty, right? That's what we needed these last few years. I don't know the answer to that. Be honest when you don't know. Be honest when you make mistakes. Not always easy to do, but so important to model. Benevolence, openness, honesty, reliability. If you say you're going to do something, do it. If you say a meeting starts at this time, start it at that time. Be consistent. We need leaders who are consistent. And then the final one is competence, being good at one's job, right? So knowing about instruction, leadership, school management, how to deal with difficult and resistant staff, those kinds of things. So, listening to this podcast, keeping yourself in the know. And so I like that they divide trust into these 5 areas, each of which can be developed. It's not something you either have or you don't have. And of course, communication is key in all aspects of trust, and not just the communication where you share your goals and your values, but the 2-way communication. Going back again to the listening leader. Are you listening? Do you have regular office hours that you're listening to people? Are you walking the building and listening to people? Like, communication is the key to all of the facets of trust. There are chapters in this book about trust among teachers, trust with students, trust with families. And so again, a great theme for the school year is to build trust in your school.
And I think, you hit it at the beginning, but it bears repeating. We don't teach, or we don't tend to be explicitly taught these types of interpersonal skills that really can make or break a leader. It typically isn't your technical knowledge of curriculum and instruction or lack thereof that gets you fired as a school leader. It's skills like this. It's the ability to build trust and work with difficult people and, receive feedback and get better as a result and listen. I think these fit together nicely in that category of interpersonal skills for school leaders. So we'll link to you have summaries of all these, Jen. So if people are subscribers, they can get to the summaries on your website, and I'll link to the book title so folks can get the books too. So thanks, Jen, for another fantastic episode. And again, this is a new concept for us. So give us some feedback. Either email Jen, email me. Let us know what you think of these short mini-sodes or mini episodes, and we'll keep putting them out there as long as people are tolerant of them.
Excellent. Talk to you soon, Mike.
Thanks, Jen. Thanks for listening to this episode of the School Leadership Show, a podcast for aspiring and practicing school leaders. Send your comments, questions, and show ideas to me, Mike, at schoolleadershipshow.com. And please consider rating the podcast in iTunes and leaving a comment. And definitely pass the show along to your colleagues.